So here's a rather uninteresting bit of trivia. Did you know there were two well-received spider horror movies that released this year relatively close together and have an almost identical premise about a troubled protagonist whose poisonous pet spider escapes into a ventilation system and wreaks havoc on the residents of an apartment complex? Well, if you haven't, good news, I'm going to review both of them because despite hating spiders with every fiber of my being, I have a peculiar fondness for spider-related horror. It's just my personal quintessential face your fears type of experience. Heck, I even made a video a number of years back detailing the untold history of spider cinema. Yet, what is particularly interesting about these two films is that they perfectly represent the creature-feature dichotomy between the far-fetched B-movie and being convincingly effective for what it is. I think they're both deserving to be in a similar conversation as Eight-Legged Freaks, Arachnophobia, and Kingdom of the Spiders in terms of reminding you to burn down your entire house at the mere glimpse of these scampering little fuckers. At the same time, however, this isn't exactly what Scorsese would call pure cinema. One might say it's a bit more elevated than that. The two films in question are Sting and Infested, the latter of whom we will cover in a separate video because there's surprisingly more to digest with that one. I swear to God, Infested is said to be a social commentary that uses spiders as a metaphor for discrimination and social deprivation in France, but that'll make sense when we get to it. Sting, on the other hand, is a little more, palatable. It's a classic self-aware B-movie with emphasis on the schlocky side of its gimmick. It tells the story of a precocious, mopey 12-year-old smartass called Charlotte, which I assume is a reference to Charlotte's Web, who spends her time scampering around the absurdly massive ventilation system of an apartment complex, spying on and harassing her neighbors, and posting rather questionably concerning stuff to Instagram. She definitely gives off the vibe of a child with emotional troubles in need of an intervention, which we learn is the result of her father's abandonment and her difficulty adjusting to her new stepfather Ethan and having all her attention sucked up by her baby stepbrother Liam.
You are the bane of my existence.
In fact, if you've ever seen the movie Becky, it's uncanny how similar her characterization is. She can give the most vicious mean mugging when she doesn't like someone. But to reinforce how precocious she is, it turns out she's written a comic book that's edited and illustrated by Ethan and about to be published pending its completion, which ends up being a key symbol in understanding her relationship with Ethan. Look, let's be honest, most of you came here for the big-ass spider shenanigans, but the human story, for as simple as it is surprisingly effective and worth addressing, if indeed largely due to its performances. The stress and tension stemming from Ethan and Charlotte's mother Heather is palpable. Ethan is not only overworked with the publishing deadline, but he also has to contend with his irritating day job as the building supervisor dealing with disgruntled occupants, only to come home to a family he tries so hard to connect with, but can't help but feel shut out by. I would even go as far as to say I think the film is harshly unfair to his character. There's a point very late into the story when all his efforts and exhaustion mount up and result in a breakdown, and Heather's response is to fucking break up with him? I mean, I get from her perspective she's also struggling with her own job and raising two kids after her previous marriage fell apart when her husband abandoned her and Charlotte, and she doesn't want to go through the same ordeal again. And then there's also having to deal with her mother Helga, who's most likely suffering dementia, and lives with her demented sister Gunter, who's the boss slumlord of the complex, and constantly antagonizes an already alienated Ethan as a weak coward who will never be part of the family. You know, maybe a poisonous killer spider isn't such a bad thing. With all the drama going on, I don't think Ethan can physically give any more of himself, so you know what? Maybe give the guy a break, because he is trying his damnedest with a family that is utterly toxic. Now, just before we go any further, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Halloween is finally here, which means scary movies, games, podcasts, and other audio goodness. And what better way to immerse yourself in the best season of the year whilst making your everyday life just that little bit easier and more relaxing than with Raycon Everyday Earbuds. These comfortably fitting earbuds are designed with seamless use in mind, with the likes of multi-point connectivity so you can pair two devices at once, which I typically use when switching between my iPad and iPhone on the fly, and a 32-hour battery life with quick charge functionality, meaning you can get 90 minutes of playtime out of 10 minutes of charging in their slick wireless case, which I also keep in one of their stylish protective covers for extra security. One of my favorite features by far is their active noise cancellation, which blocks out background noise like cars, people, construction work, chirping birds, and the whole world just burning down around you, when all I want to do is listen to Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay in peace and enjoy a soothing, if spooky, detox after a long, stressful day. For several years now, Raycon everyday earbuds have been my go-to essential for most activities in life, and Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you can confidently ensure they are right for you. Simply go to buyraycon.com/Ryan today to get 20 to 50% off site-wide. That's right, 50% off everything on Raycon's website at buyraycon.com/Ryan. Anyway, the spider itself comes from space, or more specifically, we open to news of an asteroid cluster passing Earth and causing what's believed to be America's worst snowstorm, hence why they don't just leave the building when shit hits the fan, and a fragment of that cluster crashes into Gunter's bedroom, unleashing the spider, which Charlotte soon finds and keeps as a pet. Now, by this point, most of you are probably wondering why it's called Sting when spiders don't technically sting. Well, that's what Charlotte decides to call it after seeing a copy of The Hobbit on her shelf, and doing a quick little Google search, Sting is the name of the sword Bilbo finds on his adventure, and Frodo then inherits in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I doubt anyone had that reference in mind when walking into this film. It's also kinda worth noting that while the film is set in New York, it's clearly not shot in New York, as this is an Australian production starring Australian actors, none of which play an Australian, which I'm just going to assume was an effort to give it a more neutral Western setting, but it ultimately doesn't mean anything. The opening of the film demonstrates a lot of ingenuity. We begin with the most intense Sam Raimi-style cinematic knitting ever put to screen, as an elderly lady, who we later learn is actually Helga, calls an exterminator named Frank to deal with sinister noises in the ventilation. Upon investigating, Frank quickly discovers the remains of a previous exterminator bloodied and battered in the ventilation, before being attacked himself, but not before feeling betrayed at Helga hiring his competitor first. However, per Helga, likely having dementia, instead of helping, Frank turns her attention back to the television before once again hearing the same sounds and then getting up to phone another exterminator, and the cycle repeats. It perfectly sets the tone moving forward, although granted the rest of the movie is nowhere close to ever being this clever again, as admittedly it does begin to run out of steam by the end. But an important detail worth noting is that this scene actually takes place 4 days after the spider arrives. The tone is also wonderfully carried into the opening credits to show the spider scampering around Gunter's dollhouse, mimicking the apartment complex, to foreshadow its eventual growth in size. From here, while the movie naturally slows down to establish the characters and their dynamics, the only key detail you really need to know about the spider, since you learn nothing about its alien origins, is that the more it eats, the exponentially quicker it grows. The first major cuisine it feasts on is Gunter's parrot, prompting them to call Frank per Frank, his fate is already sealed days from now, who seems pretty determined to kill whatever devoured the poor critter, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. Meanwhile, if it isn't the appearance of spiders that scares you, we see Charlotte watching a nature show about how spiders use their venom to liquefy their prey's insides, allowing them to be eaten alive, meaning everyone who dies in the film likely goes through a slow and nasty fate. This is first properly showcased on night 2 when the spider decides to target a deeply depressed woman mourning her deceased child, just in case her inevitable fate doesn't feel tragic enough for you. She even has a dog, but don't worry, it thankfully survives, I think it does at least. There is a cat, but it doesn't make it out of this one. Anyway, the depressed alcoholic lady who mourns her family gets bitten on the face, causing her to convulse and vomit blood, before slipping and snapping her neck, leaving her paralyzed as the spider slowly climbs into her mouth and cuts its way through her stomach. Like, Jesus Christ, movie! I really was not anticipating such a harrowing kill. While Charlotte does grow concerned that it's increasing size each time she goes to check on it, as it lives in a jar, which begs the question as to how it leaves the jar and then comes back when it's sealed shut. It's a plot hole that really distracted me, but before you can really think about it, Charlotte decides to take Sting to her eccentric animal expert neighbor Eric to acquire a bigger tank. Eric convinces Charlotte to leave Sting in his possession until it's transferred into the bigger tank, but he ends up contacting Ethan to inform him of the poisonous species in the apartment complex that Eric is very much convinced isn't actually a spider given its growing habits. However, despite Eric's own concerns, for some contrived reason he decides to go all mad scientist and feed Sting bigger and bigger prey to accelerate its growth, which I can only assume is in the name of science or something because the movie fails to do anything creative with it, but surely he at least knows that the spider will eventually break out of that tank, which it obviously then does. This neatly takes us back to the opening of the film, where Ethan has a breakdown, which occurs after revealing to Charlotte that, unbeknownst to her, her father lives 20 minutes down the road but chooses not to see her, while she was convinced that he was simply out of town. She reveals the professor character in her comic was based on her real father, but seeing that Ethan killed off the character prompts the belief that he's trying to replace him, hence why she's so resentful towards him. This inevitably triggers the climax of defeat the monster to bring this family happily together, as shortly after Gunter gets Dallas, Sting arrives to paralyze Ethan and Heather and take them and their baby to its nest. The thing is, Charlotte manages to miss this entire abduction because shortly before the argument, Heather sends her into her room, and she becomes too distracted with what I can only assume are her noise-cancelling Raycon everyday headphones. Don't lie, that was the perfect opportunity to once again shamelessly plug the sponsor of this video, link in the description. Anyway, Charlotte discovers that mothballs, you know, the little pesticide capsules, are Sting's weakness, a bit like the perfume in Eight-Legged Freaks, and can even dissolve its webs, so she takes the balls and infuses them with water, and basically goes to war. In fact, this is the reason Helga has managed to survive completely unscathed, even though Sting has been hiding out in her apartment. She has the mothball scent on her clothing, which seems to protect her, so Charlotte leaves her be and goes on to rescue Ethan, and they eventually end up in the basement where the final fight ensues. By the way, you all knew this was coming. Of course Frank survives. You don't spend the movie building up this very distinct character who carries a nail gun for protection just to unceremoniously kill him off and... Oh, okay, maybe you do. Unfortunate and contrived circumstances soon cause them to run out of mothball juice and back themselves into a garbage compactor where they just conveniently find Heather and baby Liam, and it obviously sets up Sting to be crushed by the compactor when they eventually get it working. This even includes a little fake-out death, just so Charlotte can proclaim that she does in fact love her stepfather when he's eventually resuscitated. But they're probably all going to die anyway, because predictably, like all creature features, Sting has laid eggs unbeknownst to the family. Look, Sting is not amazing by any means. As the spider grows, so does its predictability, but so far this year, I've yet to find a creature feature that scratched that particular itch, even if that itch is a creepy crawly I undoubtedly fear the most. As always, please leave your requests in the comments below. Stay safe, stay away from, you guessed it, pesticide poisoning, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.